This
Toolkit.
conference will now be recorded.
Yay. Communications toolkit and the implementation toolkit. So I know I'm going to go kind of fast through this because there's lots to cover from 2 years worth of work. So the toolkit, again, is about presenting compelling and effective messages. We walk people through how we got to the audiences, how we got to the messages, and what we're trying to do with that. The implementation plan, which is the second piece, is presenting a kind of phased approach for taking this communication toolkit and bringing it to life with the citizens of Oregon. In the toolkit, we've got prioritization of the audiences, the messages that we worked on, civic action to address OAH, talking about training, and we spend a little more time in the implementation on that. And also the toolkit includes media and resources that were developed by others, but we think are really great pieces of communication. When we started looking at prioritizing our audiences in Oregon, we referred back to some of the great work that's been going on through the Six Americas study. That's probably well over 20 years worth of data through Yale and through George Mason University. They put out questionnaires across the country to try and figure out where people are on this scale. And the scale is changing, has been changing
Nancy,
from, yes, ma'am.
I think we are, I'm assuming that you want to be advancing the slides, but at least, oh, there we go.
Okay, yeah, I think I have to go back to my presenter mode. Okay.
Okay. Well, so we were stuck on the
Right.
main slide, so you could just probably catch us up
I'll
to
just
where.
start right here. Yeah, I'll start here. The others were just kind of title slides about the various pieces.
Okay, great, thank
Um,
you.
sure, sorry. Technology is not always my friend. I believe in personal conversations. Anyway, the prioritization of the audiences we were talking about from Six Americas spectrum, from alarm through dismissive, and those, if you ever get a chance to dig into their website, there's amazing sets of data. They use the same questions all over the place, and we were able to dive into the Oregon specific data. You can go into the counties, the congressional districts, the urban areas. You can do all sorts of different things by sorting. Looking at things like the percentage of adults who think global warming is happening, ocean change, ocean acidification, these are all tied in with it. So you can see the differences around the state. And then we also wanted to look at the percentage of adults who discuss global warming or climate change occasionally, because there is research that shows that once people start talking about it, they're much more likely to feel compelled to do something about it. We worked with the OAH Council. The original plan was to have us working hand in hand with them to co-create things. Throughout the process, we realized that time constraints made it so it was much more like we would work with small specific groups and then bring it back to the council or bring it to various groups for input and helping us. In this case, we were winnowing down the target audience list because we threw the net wide and we said who could be important groups to work on ocean acidification and hypoxia or would be interested in it. So it started with a large group and through a series of winnowing processes and doing some rankings and some ratings, we came up with 4 target audiences that the group that we were working with felt were the most important when it came to these issues. Tourism and hospitality industry, commercial fisheries and the harvest industry, local government, particularly port and county commissioners, and then finally seafood suppliers and restaurants. And some of those are very closely aligned, which is kind of good because it means you would be consistent throughout the conversations with them. Okay. From there, we went on and started working on the messaging. And the messaging, we followed a little bit of the process that both Nettie and I have been working with for a long time, the NOCI methodology, which is the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation. What has been found through social science research is that if you start with an audience-specific value, you have cued people up to listen more carefully to what you're saying. And the 2 values that we thought were most important with this were the value of protection, that we have a duty to safeguard the well-being of people and places, and the value of responsible management, that taking common sense steps today is in the interest in future generations. The NOCI methodology tells us that when you queue up these values, you can get your messages in a lot easier rather than feeling like you're in opposition with folks. Going back to the Six Americas data, we could do some reviewing to see how many adults think citizens should do more, and that ties in with the protection value and the responsible management value for adults who think global warming will harm future generations. What's nice about this is if you go back to the Six Americas data, because they're collecting this every year, you can look next year or the year afterwards to see if there have been any changes. We also did do a lot of questioning folks and finding out what's important about communicating about ocean change in Oregon. Nettie's from San Diego, I'm from Baltimore. We all have our own regional issues. And what we noted for Oregon is that you really have an urban-rural divide, east versus west, kind of valley versus coast. These are not fights. It's just these are different contingencies. What's lovely about your state is you have a fairly small population, which means people actually have fairly strong connections to their legislators. Oregonians love outdoors, and you are so proud of being outdoorsy. It's wonderful that you have an affinity for the coast, and it seems like there were lots and lots of lifelong memories people would tell us. I'm jealous of the public access to all the beaches because that is not the way it is in Baltimore, in Maryland. It's nice that more Oregonians have a desire to protect the ocean for the future and that they see seafood as a livelihood and family tradition. What's also nice to watch and what we saw through the process is this building collaboration and trust between academics and the harvest industry, which is making progress on these issues. And we did also note in Oregon, you guys are really, really nice. So there's kind of an aversion to direct confrontation, but a desire to have a voice or a vote in everything, which helped us with some of the messaging. The next step was really looking at how we develop the kind of core message. How do you explain the scientific phenomenon of ocean acidification and hypoxia? And for that, we turned to the public. We actually did an exercise over a few days at the Oregon Aquarium. Thank you for letting us use the space during spring break. So it meant we had people from all over the state and the region. And the exercise was one where we had taken sentences from reputable websites and sources and cut the sentences so people could pick individual ones. The challenge we gave them was, you're going to be talking to a group of fourth graders. Put together your introductory paragraph on how you would talk about ocean acidification and hypoxia. And what was really remarkable was that there was actually some fairly good continuity in what people said to us. So much so that we were able to put together these two kind of elevator speeches, which are great explanations. The public picked these words. They said this is how it would do it. So ocean acidification, Oregon's ocean is changing, and many species have already shown signs of distress. Just as humans need calcium to build their bones, sea creatures need calcium carbonate to build strong skeletons and shells. The ocean absorbs a lot of carbon dioxide, which is changing the ocean's chemistry and prevents the development of calcium carbonate. This is called ocean acidification. As a result of the changing chemistry, we are seeing sea creature skeletons and shells becoming thinner and more brittle. And then the next step was we also did one for hypoxia based on their answers. Now, again, remember, these are families that were working together to get these answers. Anytime there were unfamiliar words, they would ask us what they were. But we need to give the public a little more credit because they did recognize a lot more than we might have thought. For hypoxia, the definition that they came up with, climate change is also the cause of hypoxia as warmer waters hold less oxygen. As the Pacific Ocean warms, its ability to hold a lot of oxygen declines. The term hypoxia refers to low or depleted oxygen in a body of water. Because most organisms need oxygen to live, few organisms can survive in the hypoxic conditions. Local actions will lead to a brighter future for the ocean, its species, and the communities that depend on them. So these are our kind of standard pieces, and you'll see where they show up in the messaging chain. Again, with the kind of Noki model and what we have seen through social science and through years of doing this work in zoos and aquariums is that ending with a community level solution gives people hope, gives people some agency in helping to figure out a solution. So putting it all together, you have kind of a three-part messaging piece. First, leading with an audience-specific value. Second, using those standard explanations, explaining OAH, using those core messages, and then ending with a community-based solution. So you're queuing up a value, you're giving them the science, and then you're ending it with a hopeful or a community-based solution that they have helped come up with. So for example, in commercial fisheries, we must protect Oregon's fishermen and shellfish harvesting from being harmed by the effects of ocean acidification and hypoxia. Then you include the core message. And then a community-based solution could be protecting our harvest industry means actively eliminating or reducing the risk of ocean acidification and hypoxia. So we've gone through and we've done these for all 4 of the audiences. And I'm going quickly because I know time is you got a tight meeting schedule. All of these are working on the concept of creating civic readiness among Oregonians. That gives you kind of a timeless set of skills. We want people to have the skills and the fierce desire to respond to calls for action, legislation, and funding. And those can change throughout the years, whether they're on local, community, county, and state level. So it's really about getting people primed so when they hear about something, they want to do something about it. Some sample civic actions that we talked with, again, the teams to help figure it out, like local government. How do we increase community conversations and understanding of OAH? Through public meetings, trade association meetings, community group training, all of those pieces. How do you get that conversation going? In the tourism and hospitality industry, how do you focus on economic indicators that track the impact of OAH on Oregon-specific businesses, and so on? So we've got all those pieces together. And again, that was one of the webinars. The second webinar was talking about the implementation plan. How we have a checklist, what are some recommendations? And again, this was predominantly created for the OAH Council. That was the original audience of who would be the messengers and going out and testing it. We believe that could be a broader group of people. And now you have all the resources that people can plug into. The checklist is fairly simple. It's a 5-step process, really. Assembling your messengers, who are they? Identifying your metrics, how are you going to measure the success of that conversation, that presentation that you're doing? The training of the messengers, disseminating those messages, and evaluating outcomes. There isn't a specific time frame on this because, it's going to expand and contract depending on who's the messenger, who they're going to be talking to, and if you have any timeliness issues on that. We did have lots of conversations with great people throughout this process, folks that would easily fit into being messengers or influencers, messengers being professionals who are in the field, folks that are already concerned and can be trained on the communication techniques to work with one or more of those target audiences. Influencers are more key community members that may not have the scientific methodology or knowledge, but have the ability to draw attention to issues and promote it to bring in more audiences. This is kind of the constellation of people that we worked with on this process. And you'll see we reached out to a number of different groups, and it was really heartening to get input from them, depending on whether we were doing phone interviews or Zoom interviews, or we were coming to meetings or running around and getting to talk with the fishermen. It was all a great group. And these are folks that we've also reached out to say, are you willing to be messengers? So once you've looked at your messengers, then identifying your metrics. Again, how are you going to do that? And that's going to vary depending on the audience and the conversation. Training your messengers, and that's going to be really important to give people enough time to practice. We are kind of going on a little bit of the assumption that these are going to be personal conversations. They could also become written pieces, but we believe that personal conversations are just the strongest way to get people involved. And step 4, disseminating, getting out to folks. How are you going to do that? There are a lot of great existing communication channels and groups that our messengers could tap into. You don't have to create new groups. They're out there. They're looking for things for newsletters. They're looking for things for meetings. So trying to tap right into that and going to where people are already. Finally, the last step is evaluating your outcomes. What are the specific metrics that you decided earlier in the process? How did you measure those? And then a final implementation kind of evaluation piece that we were suggesting is surveying your policymakers that, have people been talking to them? Have they been, reaching out to them to say, we really want to see some action on OAH? Because ultimately that is the group that we want to try and move to some action. We have presented an editable version. We did a sample presentation in the second webinar that folks are able to customize. That PowerPoint, and both of the communication plan webinar and the implementation plan webinar are posted on the OOST website, as well as our final report and the whole communication plan. And with that, I think I will go to all of 2 minutes for questions. And I'm going to make my things go away. There.
Great. Thank you, Nancy, for that presentation. Yeah, I'd like to
Fast.
open up for questions, comments from board members. Looks like Keith has a hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question administratively. I'm on the OOST website and I'm not finding these, and the OOST website is a little variable. There are several links to the site.
Sure.
And can somebody give us the direct location? And the second part of this question, Nancy, would be, is this also on the OAH? Is this also in the hands of OAH? Because I'm OAH also. And I remember the presentations, but I don't have them in hand.
We've sent everything to Leaf, and so he's got all of the webinars, the final meeting. It should all be there, but I can double check. I was double checking with Lisa yesterday to make sure we had it all. It's on the page where it lists all of the grant projects under ocean acidification and hypoxia. We're down as the bottom project, and if you go to those links, they should show up there. Are you pulling that up, Lisa? I can tell.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Nancy.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, Ted.
So what is the next step? It's got a great strategy. It really felt very intuitive. The way you went about it, how you put the information together. You've got an implementation plan. Now, who's going to implement it? How do we go forward from there? And maybe I was thinking 2 slides back while you were explaining that at the end.
It's okay. Yeah, the project, as we understand it, it's in the hands of the OAH Council to work with creating messengers and getting folks out into the public. Again, the original plan, the original RFP had that they would be the main messengers. We understand that people have really, really busy, crammed schedules, and we tried to make these materials so they would work with any number of people who are really interested in helping to tell the story and move people along a continuum. I don't know if that helped, but
yeah.
Okay.
And Chris, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about the OAH Council and staffing of that, because recently there was I haven't tracked it recently, but the budget markup for ODF&W and Leaf's group that supports the OAH Council was that staffing, I think, line was proposed for elimination. I have not tracked it since that. That was several weeks ago. Just kind of concerned about the OAH Council right now. And Keith, I don't know if you have any insights that maybe I haven't tracked.
Yeah, I heard the same thing, and we had that discussion at the last meeting, and we verified this was pre-legislative decision, but it was I think it was also in the governor's, and it was confirmed that was a cut in the budget. And I have not seen whether or not what the vote was and what the final outcome was. And I haven't received any communications from Leaf or anybody from OAH since then as well. So I'll reach out.
Anything else?
I better get those instruments back in the water.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all and see some of you again.
Thank you, Courtney.
I'm gonna ask Lisa on my behalf to post a link into the chat, because when I went online, I started echoing things out in here. But it's really not shameless promotion, but just an opportunity to share. I did develop for Local Ocean Seafoods, kind of a 4-page zine that talks about blue foods and climate change. And I'd just be interested to get it out to this group as something that might be a good resource moving forward. So Lisa, I'll send that to you via email.
Okay.
Jump that into the chat box.
Okay.
Thank you, Nancy. We'll look forward to keeping that project moving forward in the face of the challenges that we have. We know that the partners that you reached out to don't necessarily need the OAH to do this work. And so the idea is that it's a very publicly available and accessible toolkit for anybody to benefit from.
And just to add on to that, there are other organizations than ODFW in the OAH, and perhaps some of them can take up the mantle.
Yes. All right. Well, for our next presentation, then we're going to hear about the results of an audit by our ESP advisors. And Lisa and I will be taking that in tandem. So I'm going to start to Lisa because she has put a ton into the relationship with ESP advisors, and maybe you can give us a little bit of background to start, Lisa.
Okay, and there is a link to this report in the chat. So this whole project came about as a result of a memorandum of understanding that the OOST signed with the California Ocean Science Trust. And that memorandum of understanding basically said, and it's posted on our website in the documents or references section of our website, it basically says we have similar interests. We don't do all of the same things, but we have a lot of things that are similar. There's similarities about how our organizations were formed, our emphasis on research and science. And so as a result, if there are key nexus points in the future where it makes sense for us to work together, we want to do that. And so one of the first projects we did after signing the MOU was to sign a joint contract with ESP advisors in Washington, D.C. We're paying half the bill. The California Ocean Science Trust is paying the other half. It's a very small dollar contract to do an initial analysis or audit of our organizations and find out how what we do resonates at the federal level, where they see us being of assistance to legislators in addressing West Coast ocean issues, and how we might elevate the presence of West Coast ocean issues, specifically in California and Oregon, but we're not eliminating the potential to include Washington at some point in this. We are the only 2 ocean science trusts in the United States. That resonated significantly with ESP advisors. And one of the things that we really worked hard on with the California Ocean Science Trust was picking 4 focus areas. So if you go to page 7 in the document, these are some key places that we wanted to highlight. The fact that we've got an extensive ocean science expert network that we all have a nexus with, that we all support science-based policy, and that in turn supports healthy coastal ecosystems in all communities and in all parts of both of our states. And that the research that's being done, they're really test beds for scalable solutions. And we thought that that was important from a federal legislative standpoint for them to understand. And that what we do here in Oregon and California maximizes government investments in ocean and coastal research, because we've had state contributions to OOST research in California Ocean Science Trust research, and we're now diving into the nonprofit arena for those funds as well. And so we want federal legislators to understand this 3-legged stool of funding and how important it is to our organizations. But one of the other key things that came out about this report is we don't have a platform We are a neutral organization that simply supports science and research. There's not a red or blue or purple or whatever side to us. It's just all about ocean and coastal research and the importance of that. And so that we as organizations can be of assistance to federal legislators by offering that nonpartisan platform of just science. So those are kind of the highlights that came out of it. And next steps then is to develop a federal engagement roadmap for us. So there's pieces of this report that are kind of cookie cutter, one might say. And so we really work with them closely to make it less cookie cutter and more tailored to what each of our organizations are about, highlighting our differences as well as our similarities. But the real big piece of all of this is the next step, and that's the federal engagement roadmap. And they're going to be working on that in the next month. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a really good synopsis. And, I see this as, it feels like, oh, okay, a lot of these are things that we kind of know about ourselves, but this is also a getting to know you step with these folks who are really skilled at what they do and have a really good success level with other clients that they engage with. So it was a necessary first step to do this audit, just to understand what's the ecosystem with which we're working in. But I think this next step is where it gets a little more exciting when we look at what does it look like in terms of maybe taking advantage of some short-term opportunities, helping us identify and take advantage of short-term opportunities while we position ourselves for kind of the long game of a larger multi-year funding bill for West Coast Oceans. So it's a long process, and this was a good solid first step. Karina, you've been involved a lot with us on this too. Did you have anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I think for me, it's always like, when you go through this and you read it, I was like, oh, that's what Sea Grant does. That's our value proposition as well, in some ways. So I'm always trying to see how do we partner, and what is the unique value proposition of OOST versus the unique value proposition for Sea Grant, both in California and Oregon. And in Washington, you would run into the same thing. So that's what I'm trying to figure out, because I think also when you go to our federal representatives, and they're used to hearing from me and other Sea Grant directors and our lobbyists as well, there's going to be some similar messaging there. So I think needs to be teased out more, because I think at some point there will be a question about that. Even if it's not from me, I'm just saying from the federal side too.
Right, and Laura and I have had some email and other discussions about this too, that, what we're really talking about is an ocean agenda for the West Coast. Mm-hmm. We aren't talking about Sea Grant or the OOST or the California Ocean Science Trust or Surfrider or anybody else. We're talking about an ocean agenda, which is how they talk about it in the Great Lakes, in Lake Tahoe, in the Gulf. It's an ocean agenda, not Tahoe with the ocean, but it's the same concept. And that's how their legislators are selling it. It's a long-term game. It's not a $2 million request. It's not our organization wants this. We need an ocean agenda for the West Coast.
Yeah. And so helping us find what that channel is it something new that we have to create? Because what Lisa's referring to with Great Lakes and Tahoe, these are entities that have been successful in getting 10, 20, $30 million multi-year funding packages under regional partnerships, big partnerships. So do we have pathways for that through regional ocean partnerships, for example, or is it something that we have to create? These are big questions. Hopefully ESP advisors will be bringing some of those potential solutions to us.
So I really like that. I don't see that in here.
Yeah.
Right? So this discussion was, I think, innovative and interesting, and I think you get a lot of excitement behind it. but I don't see it in the report yet.
And it won't be in this, it
Yeah.
better be in the
Yeah,
road.
no, I know, I'm just saying
Yeah.
that direction feels.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If we pursued this ocean agenda, and there are some models out there that have been successful, I think it would be interesting to look at what's sort of the organizational makeup in those, and then how does that map to organizations that we have in Oregon and California and Washington. We might as well start trying to talk, coast-wide, or Alaska for that matter, since we all share a lot. But that might be one way to start thinking about what is it going to take.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that just this morning, in fact, because just this is happening kind of slowly and kind of quickly at the same time. So I was looking at Tahoe, regional partnership, and looking at their document. It's a lot more detailed than what we have. When you go in for these bigger asks, there needs to be more specificity of what are the outcomes, what are you trying to achieve, what are the impacts. So we have a lot of work that we would need to do to get to that point. I could actually envision, and again, this might be a bit premature, but having to set up a working group that could really push something through, because we're not going to be able to outsource that 100%, and we're not going to be able to do it in quarterly meetings. So those are the kinds of things that I think it's going to take to get us to the next level. What I hope is that we can find some short-term opportunities that can keep things flowing on maybe specific buckets of funding, for example, while we work on that. I don't know, I say 10-year, I don't know what it is, but that, longer term agenda.
Right, and do you have the sense that ESP is seeing that as a strategy for us in the?
Yeah, we've talked about it, and with our last call with California, I think we're tracking in the same direction. So like I said, I read this and I'm like, okay, there's some stuff here that feels a little cookie cutter at times, but they really needed to know, what are your relationships currently with congressional delegations, with agencies, et cetera, what's already there, just so that they know what kind of a platform we're coming in with. And that's what this first process was. It was really just an audit and kind of getting to know you. So let's hope that the roadmap kind of brings some of this more interesting stuff to the forefront for maybe even our next meeting.
Yeah.
I think another interesting relationship, given if we're looking at a West Coast Ocean agenda, is to speak with, coordinate, understand what the relationship might be with WCOA, the West Coast Ocean Alliance. That's purely governmental, so it has a different structure and constraints, but they are also thinking about, I think, West Coast Ocean agendas and things like that. So.
Yeah, and we have people even on our call here and kind of in our network that are engaged in all of this. So that's kind of where I'd like to see us moving towards in our next step, is something that might be more working group related as we start digging into what's the right pathway, what's the right channel.
And we do have some great examples of what you described, Ted, that we can look at as models. I mean, they're just really good examples, and they differ from different parts of the country. And there's lots of flexibility in how this could be designed, either for our two states or for the West Coast as a whole. But we seem to be missing large chunks of money compared to other regions of the country that are dealing with similar issues or parallel issues.
And it would seem that there's an advantage of having that consortium, in the case, speak with a larger united voice, as opposed to multiple independent, like-minded organizations. And
Right.
that might be a pathway to success. And that's what you're all saying.
Well, and I think this kind of leads us nicely into some of our upcoming conversations for the next hour or so, because our Science Summit really helped us to recraft and rethink the scope of our work and what impact it has, and being able to communicate that in a more meaningful way, not just here on the coast where we have an audience of people who care about the ocean and the coast, but what does that mean for the Midwest, for people experiencing, as I keep saying, droughts, heat waves, fires throughout the country and the world? How do we connect the work that we're doing to helping understand what these, impacts are to the greater population? So that's where we're headed.
One thing that, as you were reviewing the suggested focus areas that caught my attention was the third one, test beds for scalable solutions. I don't recall seeing us talk about that as an element of the kind of work that we're supporting, but I like that language personally. It seems like it's a solutions-oriented direction, and I wonder if that is something that we might want to more clearly, directly address, or maybe at least have a conversation about whether that is something that is useful to articulate in our strategy documents. Who we are, what we do, what we support.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of that came from California. And so that's just a kind of a value add of having this relationship, is being able to hone and align our messages. We're learning, they're also learning from us concurrently. So yeah, no, I think you're dead on there, Ted.
Yeah, and I could elaborate a little bit just because of my knowledge of the positionality of California Ocean Science Trust relative to the state legislature and their Ocean Protection Council, which is just differently structured than our OPAC, but kind of sits in the same advisory to the governor position. But there is a very tight relationship in the science policy and science services for the legislature and for the state of California that OOST fills. That is not something that we have in our mandate or have done historically. So I think that's part of where that idea is kind of coming out of that work.
Well, it resonates with me.
Yeah.
I wonder if it resonates, elsewhere. Like, would that resonate with the legislature? Would that help make OOST seem more practical in terms of what it has to offer by encouraging science that is scalable to solutions?
Seems to me that it does. And I think that's part of where we're getting some good traction with our communications team, is really making our messaging more solutions oriented. And that was something that the scientists were really wanting to bring forward too from their work, not just talking about data collection, but really what does this mean and what's the benefit? So it's kind of exciting, but yeah, we're definitely shifting that way. Any other comments, questions on the ESP advisors? I think we're going to run into a lot of these same themes as we get into the comms plan with Corey. But first, we're going to review our draft fundraising plan with Shannon Brown. Shannon is part of the Sprout team and is the lead contract fundraiser for us. She's going to talk about our fundraising plan and highlight some key areas where the board can take a role.
Hey, Lisa, we did a little bit of a huddle. This is Corey Archer here. I would suggest that we do a flip-flop if you're open to that in the agenda here. Between Shannon and myself, a lot of what we have to share on the communication side of things really helps to inform the fundraising piece too. So if you're up for it, I think maybe I'll kick things off with a bit of like the overarching update, and then we'll transition to bringing Shannon in to talk about fundraising. Does that work for you all?
Works great for me. Thanks, Corey. Yeah, so
Okay.
Corey Archer, also part of the Sprout team and has been leading on message development. And yeah, Corey, take it away.
Awesome. I'm going to do my screen share here. So there's a few pieces that we have ready to share with you today. As I already mentioned, we'll start with a little bit of that high level. Can you see my screen now? I want to confirm that too. Keith can at least. Awesome. So we have a quarterly update of the things that we've been working on in terms of communications efforts, some of the initial touch points that we've been starting with some of our legislative committees that we wanted to target for outreach this season. And then we also have some of the initial updates in terms of fundraising plan and structure. So I kind of want to break it down to a few different pieces so that it's not all at once. So I'll start with the overarching. I'll show you a couple of communications materials and resources that are available for you all. We have one in the works right now that's for our legislative audience, so we'll talk about that one, and then we'll transition our brains to fundraising. So our presentation here, again, just a quick reminder of who your communications team is. Lisa refers to us as the Sprout team. We are a team of 4 representing 3 different firms all working together in one cohesive team. So Nicole with Sprout Partners is leading our charge. She's our graphic designer. Kayla Anderson with Riparian Media is our social media guru. Myself, Corey Archer, and Shannon Brown, we're with True Wind Collaborative. We're leading the communications and legislative engagement side and fundraising strategy as well. So moving into just some of the updates, the last time you heard from me, we talked about the communications plan. So since 2023, in October when we came on board, we've been active in your board meetings. You saw Shannon in person if you were at your in-person meeting in Newport. We're actively meeting with the communications team ourselves. And Kayla with our team was also at the summit in Newport as well. So we have a lot that's been going on. On the right-hand side here, you can see some of the things from our communications plan that's already complete. On the left-hand side is what's in progress. The stuff that we've already knocked out, that's the brand style guide, communications plan, really setting the stage for what we're going to be focusing on for this first phase of communications efforts. Got key messages, first foray into social media, website content refresh. Got some tools starting to come out now as well. So a 1-pager just to communicate about those OOST priorities, really informed by that summit. And then we're working right now actively on a 4-pager that is for more of a legislative audience. So really building on that piece from the 1-pager about OOST priorities, making it more targeted about OOST key successes, and then also the budget asks that you all are in the process of putting together. Other things we're working on right now, press release when it feels like the time is right to pull the trigger on that one. Priorities communication packet, which I'll share a little bit more about in just a few moments. Social media continues to be an ongoing process. So what I want to do is show you some numbers in terms of some of the successes to date. Mentioned this was the first foray into social media. We've had some good conversation about that so far. Just a quick by the numbers on this. 12 posts so far. We've already got 69 followers on LinkedIn, 188 engagements, and there's an example over here. The ones that are getting the most traction and most success are ones where we're able to tag partners, tag you all in the posts themselves about some of the things that you're engaged in. This one was about the summit, had 2,500 impressions. So that's getting some pretty good reach. Just wanted to give you that as an example there for LinkedIn by the numbers. Instagram, also complementary to the LinkedIn posts. When we went into social media, the intention was to focus on LinkedIn first as the professional image of the OOST as you enter into social media. Instagram is the place where people come for some of those more informal type of updates. So we're starting to see engagement there as well. The thing that you all can do to help support this organic growth of social media is to engage with those posts when you see them on LinkedIn or whichever social media platforms you're personally involved in, sharing them with partners who might be interested, especially as we're sharing out things that are more related to research findings. And we're about to enter a great stage for being able to put out some things that are more like information sharing and resources, that kind of thing. So I mentioned we're starting to see some trends. I jumped the gun a little bit and mentioned that the ones where we're tagging partners or mentioning people, those are getting great traction. Let's see here. Yeah, we already talked about this one. Kayla, I mentioned our social media person. She's really pleased with what she's seen for some of this initial growth. We're only 3 months in now, I think, in terms of how long we've been on social media platforms. So these things take time, but we're really starting to reach people. And we're also starting to see driving traction to the website too. So I want to show you a couple of numbers by the website. So website visits is something that comes from a whole lot of different sources. It comes from communications that you all are doing. It comes from the summit itself. It comes from social media. We are, however, seeing, since we started doing intentional communications, pretty significant increase in visitation to the website. We've done updates on the website itself, some restructuring of the way that the messaging is formatted. 94% of the 500 unique visits over the past several months are new visitors. So that's really good to see. The places where that's coming from, Google, people just being like, what's the Oregon Ocean Science Trust? They're coming across you all, they're Googling that, and they're finding the website. Direct is if you all send that link out to others or to partners through the Oregon.gov website. Bing is another, Google similar. And then LinkedIn. So we have 15 unique visits that have come specifically from LinkedIn as well. So again, we've only been doing that socials in a short time frame, but some folks are using that as an opportunity to directly head to the website, learn a little bit more. So always good to see that when you're in the early stages of a new communications effort. So moving the brain a little bit outside of the communications more broadly, legislative engagement is something that we're thinking about this season coming up into the budget request season. So we have active requests out right now for work sessions or presentations to 2 House committees. And that specifically is the House Committee on Ag, Land Use, Natural Resources, and Water, and then the Committee on Climate, Energy, and Environment. We also reached out to the Coastal Caucus, so we'll hopefully hear back soon in terms of updates in terms of when we can get on their calendars. We're looking at fall as the timeline for all 3 of those. Now, the goal that we set for ourselves in our communications plan for legislative engagement is that since this is the first time really doing this in a targeted way, if we can get 1 work session on the calendar, that's a good success. So I'll pause there. Representative, I see you have your hand up and happy to hear from you.
Thank you very much. Help me understand what you mean when you say you'd like to schedule a work session.
Yes. So work sessions from our perspective is when we can come to in front of the committee, one of the committees, share about the OOST, share about your priorities, and then do a little bit of a preview of those budget asks as well, depending on when we can fall into that calendar schedule. So
All right,
that's what we're
thank you.
picturing there. Yeah.
All right. I would call that an information presentation. A work session, technically in the Capitol, is when a bill has been introduced, it has received a hearing, and then the committee schedules action on the bill. That's what we call a work session there. And of course, that can't take place until we're actually in legislative session.
Gotcha. That sounds good. We'll update our vernacular then that we're using for that, and informational presentation for the Oregon Ledge sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So I've just run through some of the by the numbers, the quarterly update in terms of our communications pieces. The next thing I want to share is actually putting up a couple of materials in front of you all. But let me pause first for any questions or reactions to what I've shared so far.
I think we're good to continue, at least from the room here, Corey.
Sounds good. All right, so let me see if I can do this easy transition here. The next thing I wanted to pull up was a piece that some of you in person may have printed. Lisa, I'm not sure how many materials you brought for the group, but what I wanted to preview here was first the 1-pager. So the 1-pager for OOST is meant to be a really high level, at a glance, explanation of what the OOST is, the value that you bring, and then what your priorities are. So where are you headed from here? So this one is just a front and back, has a good about the Oregon Ocean Science Trust. Most, if not all of this information is coming directly out of the synthesis from the summit, but we've tried to distill it in a way that's really easy for folks to absorb and show the story of how the pieces of information connect together. So we start with talking about these overarching priorities for the OOST that came out of the summit. On the next page is where we get into the types of projects that you all are interested in funding. Now, these things connect to each other. So things that are related to climate or energy or fisheries, those really roll up into informing these 3 overarching priorities as well around carbon and climate impacts to ocean conditions, sustainable food production and fisheries, then coastal and ocean development and infrastructure. So that's where this all is coming from here. The next layer on top of this one is where we start to target more of a legislative audience and we can get into more depth. So if you picture the same information that we just looked at on that 1-pager there, the 1-pager can be for pretty much any audience that we want to target. You all can take it, share it with your networks as appropriate, be a leave behind at different events. This one is where we get into more detail and would be something that we would take to those informational presentations, to House committees, to something that would be distributed more widely to those that are communicating about the budget asks themselves. So we've done some reframing for this one. Much of the information is similar, but what it is more about why Oregon needs the OOST. What do we need to do? What are those priorities and why? Again, we see this here again, those 3 overarching priorities and the types of projects you'd like to fund. But how do those really connect? So what's that visual here of what they might actually roll up into, recognizing they might support more than one? What this does is it starts to show the story of how you got to the reasoning behind your 3 budget asks for this upcoming biennium. So on to the 3rd page here, we get into why ocean and coastal science is important for Oregon. What's at stake, right? Then some of those key successes to date that are directly coming out of the work of the OOST and the projects that you all have funded. The final page here, let's consider this one a bit of a preview because we're still updating some of the language in here. Laura, for example, you provided some great updates of more forward-thinking descriptions for the topics. But this last page is where it gets into what are the budget requests specifically? What is that value for these next 2 years? What work is it building on top of leveraging the investments that the state has already made towards the OOST? So then you give the overview of those 3 requests. That becomes to take a leave behind. So that's what this one's looking like so far. The last thing I want to show you is, if I can find this tab with all the many that I have open, is a resource for you all. So this is a suite of slides based off of the information you've seen so far in that overarching 1-pager. If you all are giving presentations and you'd like to be able to talk about your work with the OOST or about OOST priorities, these are just a standard set of slides where you can take the information or just copy and paste the slides themselves, share about the trust, again, where you add value, what specifically is your role, what are those priorities that came out of the summit, where are you headed from here, what are you looking to fund project-wise into the future, where people can go for more information. So these are to give you a start. You can download them in multiple formats, and Lisa, I'm hoping that we can work with you to help distribute to the board so they know where to find this resource as a takeaway from here too. Okay, again, I'm going to pause there. So I've done my overview of the quarterly update, and then I've shared the few pieces of communication materials that are in the works right now, and a couple of them are ready for you to run with.
Thanks, Corey. Do we have any feedback or questions or comments at this point for Corey?
I was I've been thinking about the message on this 3-pager on the second side, where it says, we will support science and monitoring, focus on this. Given that we have very little money, and we're certainly looking for more money, I wonder if this overemphasizes our capacity to support. Maybe I'm splitting hairs, but there's quite a laundry list of science that's identified here that needs support. We certainly can't support, we won't be able to support all of this. So just throwing it out as are the semantics
We're
correct?
manifesting the ability to. No, I see what you're saying. And I do key in sometimes on things that I think are overarching or to, like, can we really say that? But this one doesn't bother me in particular. I don't know. From a communication standpoint, Corey, how do you see Ted's comment?
Yeah, so Ted, well, first of all, it took me a second, but I think I know exactly where you're looking now. So it's on the second page here of we will support science and monitoring projects, and then below that is where you get into climate and energy. We're looking at the same place here.
Yes.
Great. So some of this that I think about here too is, yes, Laura, you're totally right. This is manifesting. This is your vision setting. It's also setting expectations, though, for those that you will receive applications from for funding. So if you're thinking about it from that lens as well, where you're with something like this, you are, yes, targeting a legislative audience for budget asks, but you're also setting those expectations for those who you hope to give funding to through your grant programs. You're being clear that that's what you're looking for. This is kind of your criteria in terms of what you'd like to see in those proposals. So that's the other side of it, where that language has come from. There is opportunity, however, to do some slight tweaking here if needed. So our vision is to support science and monitoring projects focused on the following would be an alternative, or we plan to support science and monitoring projects focused on the following. So that can take your level of commitment down a little bit, but still be really clear in the direction that you're headed.
I like that vision
Yeah.
statement.
That resonates.
It's just that we will to me was the strong, over-strong word.
Too many factors at play there to feel like you can commit to that one.
Then it would throw a flag for me. I don't find will as that, but I see where you're coming from, and it sounds like there's interest in Corey maybe considering vision as the directionality for that statement.
Okay, Keith, you have your hand up?
Well, I just want to first say thank you very much for all of this hard work and this good work. This is excellent stuff. This is the kind of tools that we all need as board members and as influencers, partners, to not only inform ourselves and create synergy and edge match between and among ourselves, but then to take this out into the public and to the legislature and tell our story. And I just want to say this is to you and the entire team. You know, I really appreciate the work that you put in here. I appreciate the expertise here as well. I recognize that and appreciative. The one question I would have is a rollout plan. And how do we see this? And in many of the things that I do, we have these kinds of processes. We build them, we work on them hard, and then we look at how do we best roll this out. And so it becomes its own task, rollout plan. So can you say a little bit about how you envision this coming out in a thoughtful way, in an effective way, and how it comes out of our hands and into the hands of our audience?
That's a really great question, Keith. And also, I appreciate just the recognition and that you're liking what you're seeing so far. So to get to roll out, this is when I start to think of things like toolkits. This is when you start to package things in a way that you all as board members then aren't mentally tasked with, where do I find that one file? Where do I find those slides so that I can actually use it? So I would actually flip that question a little bit to you all as board members, and then you specifically to Lisa, of what is that best like vehicle of delivery so that you all would know where to find it. Because what we can do so far is package it all up into one home. We can give you a link to something like a Google Drive where everything lives all together, and that's your one hub source. Now, the other way that I've done this before is something like using the OOST website and having something that's a hidden page that's a resources for partners type of page. And that's something that board members and or research partners who you want to communicate on your behalf can click and access to on something as easy as a homepage where they remember what the Oregon Ocean Science Trust website is, and then being able to find the resources that way. So it's twofold. It's packaging it in a toolkit so that you have everything all in one spot, and then it's identifying what the best vehicle is for you all uniquely as the OOST board. So that's my suggestion there of where we go next.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. And I think, Keith, to your question, I think you're going to hear a little bit from Shannon here pretty soon about how this can be used with our fundraising strategy on the foundation and individual donor side. Corey already referenced the legislative informational briefings that we'll be engaging in, and this will be a channel, that'll be a channel this will go through. And ESP Advisors on the federal side has been working with the team here. So this will foray into that kind of suite of relationship builds as well. So yeah, Karina, did you have a?
Just before we move on to
Yeah.
the next, you were asking about sort of reflections on what we just heard.
Mhm.
Taking a step back, I'm also thinking about what we heard before we were talking about this, which is our communications toolkit from the OAH team, and what we learned about sort of values of people who care about the ocean and Oregon. And is there opportunity, and I'm not sure if Corey and colleagues, if you've kind of like listen to that and maybe that's useful, like how can we make use of some of the other projects that and information that we're gathering about. I'm thinking the legislature is going to care about what the people of Oregon care about, and like are there some connectivities there to take advantage of. So you don't have to answer right now, but I think there might be.
Yeah, I don't. So my initial reaction is that I've seen that presentation before months and months ago when they were first starting to work on that piece. I had the benefit of hearing that with the Marine Resources Advisory Council I work with up in Washington. So we were excited to hear how Oregon was planning on communicating about ocean acidification and hypoxia. So the thing that really stuck with me the most when I first heard that was about the different types of interest level in particular. So it's like the emotionally invested, those that are a little bit more apathetic, and like how that distribution overlays for the audiences in Oregon. So that's something that we were thinking about when we put our communications plan together in particular too. We kind of tiered like what are the key audiences we need to reach for OOST specific communications. And then what's that like second tier below that, those that might not have quite as much emotional investment but are interested in why. So we integrated some of that when we were initially thinking about how we want to phase the type of messaging and then also the materials that support that specifically. So I think a lot of what came out of the OAH communications was from like a framework perspective, really valuable to think about in terms of communications for the OOST. Some is less applicable because the OOST message and goals are more broad than just ocean acidification specifically, but was really useful in thinking about for our framework too.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. I just also want to say I feel great about the direction this is going. It is so foundational for us to have this suite of tools to communicate our work. We've never been in this good of a position before. So thank you. I really, a couple of things that I just love about it is how you're developing a suite of pieces that are flexible yet also integrated. So I feel like the process of developing that brand and style guide really helped set us up for that kind of ease of flexibility so we can attach that third page, and it may look differently for different reasons without having to go back and recreate the whole thing. So I'm just so excited to see this, and I just appreciate you taking all of my nitpicky input that I give at times.
It's good input. Always appreciated.
Pieces are there. It's just like the flow and all of that. It's a lot of work. So, there's a lot of back and forth that goes to getting to the point where Corey's able to present this today. But I think it's just so foundational for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. I'm glad you're happy with the direction we're headed. So one of the things that we're working on from here as well is taking a look at some of the reports that are coming out from research partners. So Lisa's passed all of that along to us. It was great to hear, the presentation today about the OAH communications, for example. And we're going to propose probably some updates to the website and effective ways to package some of that information, really celebrate the success stories that are coming out of the grant work. And marry that too with like the socials and other communications pieces too. So that's something that's to come from here. And Lisa, can we make it a follow-up for us to have a quick huddle just about the best way to deliver these resources to the board members so they can take it and run with it, to Keith's point? Just want to make sure that that's not lost and people really know where to find things once it's all packaged up and ready to go.
Definitely.
Awesome. Shannon?
Yeah, thanks, Corey. I felt like, to Karina's point, what you just said about how we're going to be taking all of this, it's kind of happening in perfect timing, right? As these science synthesis are coming in, and just being able to distill that information and get it into the website and shareable on social is a big part of what we're going to be working on in these next quarter or two as well. So that, yeah, hopefully that'll all percolate up as we go along here. So yeah, I guess with that, I'll just, now that I'm now that we're kind of wrapping up that, moving into the fundraising plan. So let me see here. Let me get the.
Oh, Lisa may have switched you to presenter, but I think Lisa might flop back to me for just a moment. I have our slides already pulled up, so I think I'll run through those for Shannon to talk about some of the fundraising pieces, and then you can switch back over to her. Got to
Yeah,
do a tag team.
yeah. I just realized I've never actually used GoToMeeting, so I similarly am, working our way through here.
Yeah, here we go.
Perfect. So first of all, I just kind of, go ahead and advance next there. Wanted to walk us through just the timeline and where we're at, then, as we go along where we're going. We just began this work in March, and I was able to be with you in person in Newport, which was just a really great experience to hear from you all. And it seems like you're a really new board coming together and just have so many big ideas. And I feel like it's all really starting to come together. And as we see in just our legislative engagement and with our social media work, that it's a little bit of an exponential curve. You get started with ideas, and as you kind of walk down the path, things become more clear, things become more evident. And we really are at the beginning stages where we're developing these big ideas, and that takes time. So we can be gracious with ourselves as we work through that process. We had a couple of rounds of fundraising plans between Lisa and I. We got Laura one. I was able to meet with both Lisa and Laura in the last month and kind of get a really good, solid next steps on how to engage you, the board, further in that plan. And then we had a meeting with the Oregon Community Foundation to understand their role in our partnership, because they're really going to be a huge part of any type of fundraising, just based on how the trust is set up, that they cannot take tax deductible donations. Our partnership with the Oregon Community Foundation is going to be a really great resource as we explore more of those types of options. Next. So what I kind of heard from our meeting in Newport is, and just through several other conversations, that kind of the overarching goal is, and fundraising objective, is that we're going to be diversifying funding sources. Right now, we have, received the biannual support from the Oregon legislature, and we really want to grow. We want to expand into more areas to support organizational capacity and to increase the grants that we can give to support the research we want to do about the Oregon coast and the coastal communities. So overall, the objective of the OOS is to distribute 2 to 3 million in competitive grants annually, right? So this is kind of the roadmap of the big picture where we want to go. So next. So from that, I was able to tease out what would then be the goals of how we get to that. And as we've already heard from Corey, that we're going to really have a path to growing our legislative and general support funding. And then goal 2, we're going to be diversifying those funding sources. And that's really where I come in. I'm going to be helping in this sort of goal 2 realm of looking at organizational capacity grants and building relationships with private donors and foundations. It's worth noting, though, that you have other opportunities for fundraising that you're already beginning to leverage and grow, building partnerships. I know there are lots of opportunities to grow partnerships that could be fruitful in fundraising. The Oregon Ocean Science Trust is one you already have the MOU signed with. But there might be other partnerships in the future, and just keeping that in the back of your mind as you build these relationships, that there might be funding opportunities through those relationships as well. And then I know that you're also working with your ESP advisors to look at federal funding to support some of the grant work that you do. So those are sort of the overarching goals that I identified as fundraising buckets that the OOST is looking for. And I'm going to really be diving more into goal number 2, diversifying funding sources. Next slide. So here's sort of a outline of where we might go to do that, right? So we were going to launch a campaign in which we want to raise $500,000 over the next 5 years to build organizational capacity. And again, going back to that main objective of trying to get to a place where the organization can support having $2 to $3 million in grant funds in giving away scientific research grants annually. So I've tried to break down the steps of what that might look like. So first, you have to build relationships with major donors and foundations. Next, you need to engage those relationships to seek financial support. You need to really start considering what those people or foundations need and how what the OOST is doing can fit into those needs, and then make that a financial relationship. You have to have an accountability framework in place. Basically, that just means, how are you following up? How are you thanking them? How are you keeping those people or foundations engaged? And then lastly, I put in that I know there's a lot of there was some talk at the meeting in Newport just about the organizational standing and growth possibilities. And mostly that's just the trust is in a unique position, not being a 501c3, in the types of relationships they can pursue. And and also the Department of State Lands, there may be capacity to continue to write checks at the level of growth that we're talking about, just flagging that as this organization grows into an organization that's serving that $2 to $3 million grants annually, recognizing that there might be organizational structures that need to be identified in that growth. So that's kind of where that bullet point goes. Next. So I do really want to show you the fundraising plan, which I'm going to do after this slide here, but I just kind of wanted to let you know that where we're going in all of this. So after we look at the plan, and it's kind of goes back to that toolkit as well, how you best want to have this delivered so that you can engage with it and really make it your own. But the main thing is, before really, the main ask that I have as we continue this work is just to really start asking yourself who you know. Who are your friends? Who are people you know who are passionate about ocean research, and Oregon in general, right? And starting to populate a list of those names. And then once we have a list of names, that is kind of the first step in going out and being able to do this like fundraising campaign that I'm talking about. Once we have that list, we can sort of evaluate our goal, $500,000 over 5 years. How does that feel now that we have this list? And then once we have that, we can begin the process of donor cultivation, which I'm going to talk about here a little bit more. So thanks, Corey, for showcasing that. Does anyone have any thoughts, just really high level, before I pull up the fundraising plan and kind of, thank you, Lisa. Let me get that up for us here.
Can I just ask a clarifying question, Shannon?
Yes.
When you are proposing 500,000 for organizational capacity, so that would be to have the kind of contracting and administrative support that the organization needs, rather than bringing in that funding to support grant opportunities and projects. I guess that's my assumption. Am I correct in that?
So I think that there's a couple of layers here when we're talking about organizational development, and there's sort of like the annual budget, which is that overarching $2 to $3 million goal, and then we're assuming that about 10% of that is going to be our administrative costs annually, and so the goal of $500,000 is really just it's just somewhere to start, right? Like when you start approaching foundations or individual donors, having a number that you're all kind of targeting moving towards is just a really good benchmark to have in helping us outline the steps of how we're going to get there. So it's something that I'll kind of talk about as we go on a little bit here, but it could be any number of things. It could be a combination of foundations and individual donors. It could be just one way or another. But I think ultimately that number did come from you. I think the initial number I had in the plan was 250,000. And so it's all a little bit of a, it depends. It depends how much work we can put on the front end of just doing the research and developing the outline of where we're going, what kind of names we feel like we can get, and just what kind of relationships we feel like we can build in this process that's going to give us our end campaign goal.
Okay, I think I understand. So 500,000 is kind of a goal just to contribute to the overall boost funds. So we're not going to a funder and saying, we need you to support administration capacity building, or we want you to support a specific project. It's just, at this point, it's kind of talking about a contribution to that overall budget number without a specific kind of a landing spot.
And at this point, that is where we're at. And I think there is a lot of room to build that out and to make that a more concrete ask. We need X number of dollars to support this specific science project. That becomes a very, very compelling story of where we want to go. Right now, I think we are still in the planning phase of like, where are we going and what are we trying to pursue here? And so we're just trying to get our minds in the fundraising planning process of like, what are the numbers that this organization really needs to do the work that it wants to do? So I'll just walk through the plan, and we'll kind of see if maybe some of those things become more clear, because I think it would be really powerful to have those kind of more concrete, this specific thing, this specific dollar amount to support that work. And that is hoping, I'm hoping that is part of what this board can kind of gel on and come up with through reviewing this plan and over the next couple of weeks here. So the goal of a fundraising plan is to ultimately have a document that you might take as a formal document to some of these engagement meetings or sessions with donors or foundations. So it gives just a little bit of background information. It's all fairly boilerplate, pulled from documents that you've already had. Again, I'm going to talk with Lisa following this meeting and try to figure out the best way to make sure you all can engage with this as well. Here are those, that slide I showed where we talked about the specific goals. Now this is sort of the description of funding sources, the anticipated expenditures for this year. Now some of it hasn't exactly happened yet, but basically you have staffing that you support, and then you have kind of basic operational costs that you also are holding in your organization. So this is kind of that 10%, let's see, the trust income is from 10% administrative overhead for all grants to support the organization management and development goals. So there's your 10% that's sort of supporting these activities. Now, do we need to increase that? Potentially, right? So again, just what this fundraising will directly support, and what strategies. This is part of what I looked into from what you all had put together in your strategic plan. So you just already had some really good things about what the organization is doing to look at growth and capacity. And then this is where I really spent the majority of time fleshing out the plan. So I think this has changed. I need to update that because I know that this was a past goal. But so again, I'm really going to be breaking out this component of the plan, how we are going to move forward with diversifying funding sources. And so first, we're going to be building relationships with foundations and major donors. I'm going to be helping support that work along with you, the board of directors. I have developed a foundation tracker as well as a major donor tracker, which I'm sort of working through identifying and triaging which foundations might be the right ones to reach out to initially, and which ones are going to be good ones to understand what their capacities are and how we might best fit into their funding goals. But I really feel like through the process of talking with Laura and Lisa over these last couple months, and even at our initial meeting, that to pursue foundations is maybe not the top priority this year. I feel like that the OOST is doing so much work in its just developing more relationships and general understanding through contacts of just people in Oregon, that really honing in on a major donor campaign might be a better fit for this year. And whether that's a major donor, when I say major donor, I'm thinking gifts with a comma, so gifts $1,000 and above, or whether it's just a general fundraising campaign where we're sort of soliciting donations from anywhere from $20 to $50 to $500. I think that part of the plan is also really going to be coming to light depending on the type of names we can all pool together through this next couple weeks or month. So the next step is, once we sort of have this list of names of people we're going to solicit and engage in the OOST understanding, we're going to begin to cultivate those donors. So we're going to establish what that looks like, and we're going to develop materials that might support that engagement. And then we're going to start asking. We're going to start developing those conversations and seeing what those people, specific individuals or high donors might be interested in knowing. Maybe there's an opportunity to have an event or to potentially host some kind of one-on-one discussion or like a larger meeting where we're engaging with those people specifically. And then this is a really important component to any kind of fundraising, right? Is just, how are we following up? How are we saying thank you? What is the kind of information that we just the presentation we heard this morning from Pathways Collaborative. We gave them funding, and they are reporting back to us what that they did with the money that we gave them. So it's just really important that we're building in that as part of the planning process. And then any other components, to your point, Laura, say what our goal ends up really becoming is, we need $250,000 to hire a staff member over the next 2 years to support capacity building for the OOST. Then we need to make sure we hire that staff, that those things that we said we're going to do are actually happening within our framework. So then that last goal, which I mentioned a little bit before, is just as we look at growth of an organization, that we're also trying to understand what the internal growth looks like as well, and making sure that it's a sustainable path as we move forward. Here at the bottom, I've really just written out the process of donor cultivation. So just what are those 5 steps that it looks like when I say donor cultivation. And again, we're going to be starting right here at the very beginning. We're just going to be filling out, it's like an Excel spreadsheet, name, last name, how do they like to be contacted, what's their email, what's their phone number, and do they, like, why is their name on this list? Is it because they've given to ocean research in the past? Is it because they attended the summit? Is it because they love going to Laura's restaurant? And, you know, why are they on the list? So it's really a simple spreadsheet. And that's really where we're at right here, is we just want to get as many names as we can. And then we can move through the further process of donor cultivation, which is establishing the viability of prospects, and then beginning to cultivate them, reaching out, and then only at this point do you start to think about asking them. And so there's really quite a bit of work prior to that by the time you get to the ask, you pretty much already know whether they are gonna say yes or no. You've been cultivating them along, that the ask then becomes very easy. And that's the part you want to be sitting with. And that part takes time. This process for an individual to give it any large amount could take 6 months to a year. So it just really depends on the types of names and how close we are to those individuals once we get them on the list, and how quickly we can move through this cultivation cycle. And then always that last piece is just, how are we coming back and ensuring they're recognized for their gift, making sure that they know just the impact in the organization that they have done. So yeah, like I said, it's just a process that takes time. I also just wanted to sort of, this number has changed. I know in the PowerPoint I said 500,000. And okay, so I broke it out as 250 down here. But okay, say we have a list of 200 names that board members are able to come up with. Again, who are they? Name, address, phone number, and why are they on the list? Then we can kind of go through and start tiering those and identifying, do we have anybody on this list who we think might be a donor at $50,000? And then do we have any who could give potentially at $20,000? And then so on and so forth, that you're seeing here just kind of the number of the number of individuals that you would need in order to wrap back up to 250,000. So if that number then becomes $500,000, we either need to say, okay, we need to be looking at larger granting foundations to fulfill the additional $250,000, or are we looking at some kind of match scenario where we're thinking like the Oregon State Legislature is going to match that? What is our narrative there on getting to the $500,000, and how? Or is it all through individual donors? Is it through potential foundations as well? And what does that pathway look like? And I think we're really at the place now where we can sort of start to settle those details and think about what that looks like for the OOST. And then I kind of talked about it a little bit, just what the next steps are. Continuing to fill out the foundation tracker. That's something that I'm going to do, and be reporting back with Lisa and Laura about maybe what maybe 1 to 3 foundations are that we might potentially follow up with this year. And then working with you all to develop the donor prospect list. Again, that's just names. We just need names. And then that's going to really help us understand where to go after this, as far as where our fundraising capacity and cultivation can go. So it's kind of a lot, but there are a lot of pieces that are I've tried to break out to make it more clear and to hopefully make it seem like a little bit easier of a lift. Again, the next step really is just to come up with names, which feels like probably a little bit of a hard place to be at. It's like, well, I don't know what kind of names to put on the list, but I would encourage you to just put as many names as you can, and just to put as much information as you can into the tracker that can really help us identify where we're at in the tiering and the cultivation process, and just seeing how far we might be able to take this. People are often somewhat honored to be able to be asked to support such amazing scientific work. So, No need to be shy. Yeah, Keith, what are your thoughts?
This is a question mainly probably for the board to discuss, but
Yeah,
I'll just put this out here as an idea. There's something that I do with my films, and it's host an event for
yep.
potential donors, and specific an event specifically tailored to donors and support and outreach for support. And so I'll just put that out there as a to be discussed, as another part of a way down this very good pathway that you've defined for us.
And Keith, I just want to mention too that that was actually a really good nugget that we heard from Carlos at the Oregon Community Foundation as well. And it still starts with this list, right? So these names and these identification
Yeah.
of the people is still number one. And then once we have that, it's like, yes, can we get them all in a room together? Do we need a science symposium where we're giving a brief introduction about the type of work that we're so thoughtfully engaging with and supporting? What does that look like? But I think that's a great flag, is just, yes, people, get them in the room together, right? Get them thinking about things.
Yeah, and I think perhaps maybe in conjunction with the science symposium as we did, because that event that evening with those people from the science summit is the kind of event featuring local seafood, local community members, et cetera, would be the type of event where we generally find a lot of success with the donor community.
Yes. So share something else. Okay, so this is the major donor tracker. Like I said, it's pretty simple. And again, what the rollout is plan and getting you able to start filling it out. But this is the next steps that I've proposed. And I want to be conscious of your time, what your timeline is, but I do see this as a successful next step in our fundraising planning here, is just getting as many names as possible into the donor tracker.
And so Shannon, you're thinking of like in a Google spreadsheet so that we can see what one another is putting in so that we're not duplicating.
Yeah, this is in Google. This is a Google document. And yeah, that would be, I mean, ultimately it all being aggregated in one place is going to be the most important. But if you all want to start your own and then give it all to me and I can import it all, whatever, I want to be flexible, but just as much information as you can. And even at this point, I've definitely outlined the start as a major donor campaign, which I think is a good goal. But if the contacts that each of you have is, I know Lisa, you expressed a little bit of concern that maybe we're in a better spot to be just doing a general donation campaign, but I think we're going to have a hard time reaching the numbers that we're trying to reach with just a general donation campaign, just because we don't have we're still at the very beginning. There isn't an email listserv of just general names. We don't really have a social media presence yet, that we're just really at the beginning of starting to put ourselves out there. And so to go about it that way, I would think that a goal for like a general donation kind of campaign that would be reasonable is probably between $5,000 and $10,000. But when we're talking about $500,000 and $1 million, I think starting with a major donor campaign might be just more targeted and more effective. Any other questions for me? We have just a few. I know we had a few more minutes on the agenda here.
This is Ted DeWitt. Could you just speak just a little bit more about the types of people that you're thinking you would like to see on this? So as you were speaking, I was thinking about, well, I've got a lot of friends who have done work in ocean science, retired, probably do annual donations. But I feel kind of queasy about, you know, giving out my friends' phone numbers and addresses and
This is normal.
well,
This is a normal reaction to
well,
fundraising.
this is where I'm. This is my first rodeo in this. So, you know.
Yeah.
But then
Well,
I also feel comfortable about their privacy and keeping this information private and secure.
yeah. No, I really do hear you. And I think that it's just think about it though. I mean, raise your hand. Do all of you donate to organizations that you feel mission aligned and compelled to, nonprofit organizations, right? I do. I give money. And I would assume that your friends, being your friends, are interested in the type of work that you're doing. And that maybe they can support, but maybe they can't support in a really like, large financial way. So I want to leave it to your best judgment on the type of names that you put on this list. But I think that there's also a lot of control still in the process. We're not just going to be sending out a mass email to these people. Like, that's why I'm saying this process takes time, is because it might be a personal email from you, Tim, saying, hey, last time we had a beer together, or maybe do you want to have a beer? And I just want to talk to you more about the Oregon Ocean Science Trust and, some of the work that we're doing, and that maybe you might be interested in learning more. I know that your son is really interested in ocean hypoxia or whatever connection you can bring to it. But yes, fundraising is a very personal thing and it can feel really uncomfortable. But at the same time, wouldn't you feel kind of honored if somebody wanted to ask you that? Like, that thought that you had funds to give? I don't know. Like, I guess I do a little bit when people want me for things. Gosh, thank you so much for give at that. But in a way, I think we have to just change our mindset a little bit about, because people
I don't think that's happening.
connection.
Hey, Shannon, we're losing you a little bit on this end. I don't know if others are having that same breaking up too.
Yeah, we are also.
Yeah.
Try turning off your
I
camera.
don't want.
Yeah, Shannon, try taking your camera down. That might help with the audio if your bandwidth is getting a little funky.
Yeah, I think it might be. It's probably like everybody's AC on hot peak of the day. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, Shannon. Thanks.
Good deal. I don't want to get on a pedestal about it too much, but I will just leave it to you to put the best names you can think, and just know that at this phase, it is very much going to be probably on you as board members and making some of those initial connections, or just developing the next steps in the avenue of we want to go. And I can help you write the scripts and get the resources that make you feel really comfortable in making that ask. So just start where you're at. And like I said, if what you're finding is that we really have contacts that are more in the like general donor fund and not so much the major, which I'm calling gifts with a comma, then we'll just go from there.
So one good first step, I would imagine, Lisa, if we can work with you to get the names from those that came to the summit, why don't we populate some of those into that tracker? Then that gives you all like, oh yeah, I remember talking to that person at the summit. And then you can think about some of your professional contacts as well who are already engaged in some of this work that would feel appropriate for adding to that list too.
Yep,
So
that's
Lisa,
great.
can we?
Sure,
Okay.
I have contact information on them, but I'll have at least their names, titles, and emails. We'll have some of it. Probably won't have addresses or anything.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. And I feel for you, Ted, because I think we all have that. Like for me, like I feel like I can walk into a foundation's office and make our pitch, because that's what they're there for, right? Like that's their job, is to manage programs and manage funds for other people. It's very different on the individual level. I think it's a little bit of a leap of faith for some of us and for the organization to go in this direction. I think we'll take it as it comes, and see where it goes. I do want to start those conversations with those 3 or 4 key foundations concurrently, because I think there is, that's a long game too, just understanding where that alignment is for the foundations that we've reached out to in the past and have said, ocean science isn't in our funding portfolio. Well, how do we find those touch points with human health and with biodiversity and with maybe climate change, resilience, in terms of we now can communicate better with foundations and find alignment where before maybe we were just ocean science data collection kind of organization. So I think we've got a number of different roads that we're going to take on this, and ultimately we'll be learning along the way and seeing where we're successful. I know for me, like I feel like with some of the tools that have been developed with Corey's work, going and if I felt like it was a really good contact, like there was really, like I could be helping this person put their money towards something that we know that they really care about oceans. Like I could go and make that ask, but I don't think I'm gonna like call my neighbor necessarily and be like, hey, let's have a beer. I want to talk about the Ocean Science Trust. I don't think I'm there yet. But there's probably just a few small steps that we can take. But I do believe that our board has, like if somebody were coming to ask me to contribute to something that I felt good about, I'm gonna have a much more just meaningful interaction with somebody who's on a board than like saying, hey Shannon, go out and do this on our behalf. And that may happen sometimes. She'll be out there on our behalf sometimes, but we have to be willing as board members to be present to really make that connection and make the pitch, because that's where it's going to be more meaningful for people. So we're going to dip our toe in the pool together.
Did you have a comment? Your hand is up there. I just didn't know if that was a new hand or an old hand there, Keith.
It's like Keith, yeah.
Oh, so Laura, I just wanted to speak to something you just said, and that's that. I have a bit of experience in working with foundations as well, and I also have experience in doing this major donor cultivation work and also just general donor cultivation. And part of the reason that I think, judging on where you are right now, why I think this avenue might be more fruitful is because of the amount of legwork and just to write a grant that might earn the organization $25,000 can be a really big lift and undertaking. And then the reporting on that grant, and then the fact that you might not get that grant again the next year can just be like a really big undertaking, especially with the way that the organization is staffed right now. That I think that if you, so part of the reason that I am encouraging us to go to at least evaluate and think about this other process of fundraising is because when you develop these relationships, and it's not like you're going to be asking people who potentially are just your random neighbor. We're talking about tiering these and really making sure that by the time we're asking, we have a pretty good feeling that they're going to say yes, right? We're going to cultivate it in a way that we're going to feel really comfortable about asking, right? Is that because then when you say thank you and you go back and ask again next year, they're probably going to give you the same amount again, if not more, or your ability to grow that relationship increases. Unlike a foundation where the reporting and the granting and the competitiveness, honestly, of those. I mean, the Oregon Community Foundation grant that he talked about, we would be eligible to apply for. I have received that grant in the past, and it is probably just the amount of work for $25,000 can just feel, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Not in alignment.
Yeah.
And you might not even get it. So it is easy to walk into those foundations and have those conversations, but to actually get to the point where the money is flowing can be also a long process. Lots of relationship development that if we put that same amount of effort into targeted names of people that you all know, we might be even more successful. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this process.
Well, that's exactly why you're here, Shannon. So thank you,
Give us courage.
yes, and you have a lot of experience in this, and together with your partners. Like I said, for some of us, it feels like a little bit of a leap of faith, perhaps. But yeah, let's endeavor to take this each step as it comes. Is there other conversation or comments or questions from the board?
Well, yes, thank you so much. I look forward to helping you through the leap, and I think we can, enjoy ourselves along the way. So, yeah, thank you very much for having Corey and I here today, and yeah, we look forward to moving ahead.
Great.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Shannon.
thanks everybody. I'm going to
Thanks.
jump off here shortly, but good to see you all as always. And Lisa and I have some good follow-ups. We're already having some, game planning on the side here. So thanks again and more to come.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you again. Well, with that, we're at the public comment part of our agenda. Are there any, I can't read the names on the screen really easily, but are there any members of the public that would like to give public comment today? There's nobody, I don't think there's anybody online that we would characterize as public. So with that, do we have any other business to discuss?
I will get you some examples of what we talked about, those other agenda type big things coming out of the Gulf and other places, because I think it would be good to look at those. And I'm most familiar with the Tahoe of all of them, but they basically designated one organization to receive those multi-millions of dollars of federal funds on an annual basis, and then have an MOU among all the agencies to push it out. So it's really a slick system, and we need to probably be thinking down the line of an MOU and what individual roles that partners can play, like managing the actual contracts that go out to the scientists that do the research, because Sea Grant does that to the nth degree. So is there a potential MOU with Sea Grant in the OOST for them to take over that piece of that whole thing? Just like those types of things the board might be wanting to think about if some of this fundraising comes to fruition. Because it's going to be, we can do incremental. I mean, we can, if we get another $1 million next year or another $2 million, we could do that. But at some point, we're going to exceed our capacity. And that ties into accountability, right, for how those funds are coming and going.
I will just, if I might, Sarah, put you on the spot to just say something about how we do that kind of work, or just to maybe inform the board a little bit about how Sea Grant might work with other partners or have worked with other partners in sort of similar roles.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, as Lisa said, our bread and butter is managing competitive funds, getting funds out to PIs. We do have managed funds for other partners. In the past, we have a great proposal and project management system. So both receiving proposals, setting up the review process, and then, tracking. I guess that's one question that I came away from today's meeting thinking about is, how does OOST measure success? What kind of reporting is in place? Sea Grant being federally funded, we report probably more than anyone else in the entire world, not suggesting that OOST wants to go down that route, but that's the accountability piece that I'm thinking about,
Right.
is what's happening with the data. So I think that those types of expertise are things that Sea Grant can bring to the, help OOST with thinking about, where the overlap is between Sea Grant and OOST and where are, strengths of the different organizations. So was that kind of what you had in mind?
Yeah, that's what I had in mind. I mean, I was also thinking, and Lisa and I have talked a little bit about this on the side. California Sea Grant does a lot of that kind of work for other entities in California, has done that historically. So there is like experience doing that in the broader network.
Yeah.
There are a variety of structures that might be appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Anyway, just something to explore,
Mm-hmm.
one potential partnership.
and I just brought it up because that is it's just a whole culture down in Tahoe about we're here, we've got this one thing, we're all behind it. It's not about what each of our individual organizations want, it's what each of us can bring to the table to realize that agenda. That's their whole mindset. It's very non-siloed. So like they're siloed from the standpoint that they each know their strengths, but that completely dissolves when they're talking about what they want to accomplish. It's not organizational driven. It's the alliance driven.
I think about the Chesapeake Bay versus San Francisco Bay, because that's a comparison we often used to make when I was in San Francisco, and some of the struggles that attracting funding into San Francisco Bay. It's one state, it's not multiple states, distance from DC. But there was a lot of strength in bringing money into the Chesapeake Bay because you had multiple, so I'm thinking of the West Coast Alliance, right? Like how does that might be another reason why developing this sort of regional approach could be powerful.
Yeah, I'd also like to learn more myself about regional ocean partnerships, where that I really haven't been tracking. Where is that? Where can we find value in that existing process and channel? So maybe that's something we can try to queue up for our next meeting. Along with West Coast Alliance. And this is a great ongoing conversation as we continue to grow. And it always takes me back to why we were created in the first place. There was a need that was demonstrated, and it was, really just bringing more funding and being able to stack funding. So as much as it makes me, kind of like, oh, how are we going to do that with private fundraising? That is a niche that OOST can really explore, that can add value. And it's not just measuring our success in our throughput of how many millions of dollars that we personally as OOST handled in the course of a year, but if we can support, like the Oregon Kelp Alliance is a great example of an entity that doesn't need us to have throughput to it necessarily, but how can we support just getting more research done in Oregon and on the West Coast. So as we think about metrics, it gets kind of hard to say, well, I supported that. Do you count that? Well, I don't think we need to go there, but the partnership aspect of it and not recreating capacity that already exists and wants to be more utilized. So, yeah.
Impact.
Yeah.
And how do we distinguish ourselves from the others so that we don't just sort of become nothing in this conglomeration of, where there's so much redundancy of interest that, maybe we sort of, I wonder if that's, a tension to try to keep yourself as.
Well, we do have
and as a, you know, a unique organization in a consortium where there's many common interests.
We do have that identified unique, like what our origin story is, where we sit, how we were created. That I know that California California Ocean Science Trust has kind of capitalized in their private philanthropy work around that space. That's what's different about us compared to this other nonprofits you might give to. It's the relationship with the state and policy and governance. It's a unique value proposition potentially.
And the nonpartisanship,
Yeah.
right. So I think, Ted, the strengths. What are the unique
Right.
strengths of Oost that sets it
But we
apart?
have to keep those in present mind. And the fact that we fund science.
Yeah.
As the others might be giving to, you know, many different types of efforts to
Right.
conserve ocean resources. Looks like Keith's hand is.
Keith?
So different topic here. I did reach out to ODFW and got some information back on their budget and where it stands. I provided some links to that. So my question would be, you know, it appears as though if this budget cut does go through, that ODFW would no longer be able to participate and lead, manage, administer OAH. And I'm wondering what role we have as OOST to speak up in support, because ODFW cannot lobby on behalf. And with Senator Anderson and Representative Gomberg and the Coastal Caucus at maybe our disposal, is it appropriate for us to comment about the value, the need of those positions and that funding to remain in the budget? That's something that we would be in a position to comment on as this makes its way through the legislature.
You would have to check with DSL, I think.
Because we're under DSL.
We may have limitations as well around lobbying, and we've explored this in the past because we're under DSL.
We can check. We'll get an answer on that.
Sure. No, thanks.
Do we have any sense of why this happened? Was it external forces saying, well, you know, you're going to have to trim your budget, ODFW, or did ODFW say, well, we're just,
yes,
you know, our mission isn't that?
This comes from this is the first cut at the governor's budget, so it's the executive branch budget proposal. And so they give directives to their agencies, executive branch leadership, to say, develop a budget of X. How are you gonna, if we cut it by 10%, what are you cutting? You know, like there's sort of instructions like that that come down. And then, so it's kind of similar to the federal budget. The president puts out a budget, right? Executive branch agencies, we suffer the slings and arrows of that as CMAN. They tell us, well, you're not gonna get the money you got. We're gonna cut all your aquaculture funding, was the proposal on the table this year. Well, then the legislature comes back in and goes, the committee marks up the budget and they go, no, we don't agree with that. We'll change that. So that's, I think, the role of legislature in this process, potentially your state. So just to kind of like put it in 30,000 foot view of how the budget pie gets made.
And Corey just confirmed we are scheduled for the October Coastal Caucus. She just got the email from Luke, so we'll get an email out on that. Yeah, we need to check. And if we can, as an OOST, behind the OOST brand, we may need to register as a lobbyist with the state for it to be kosher.
I feel like we just had this conversation. It was around the federal side. Yeah.
It was around the federal side.
With lobbying and what are
But the question was about federal and not state.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that the answer we got back was specific to federal. So we'll make
and then
sure.
our relationship with the feds is completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll get a request to Jean to clarify that.
I'm sure we can be educational,
Right.
and that's a distinct So I think talking about it and our concerns about it is not lobbying. It's just saying, okay, well, you just aired some information
Yeah.
here. So that's educational for folks who are tuning in.
Keith, are you saying something to us? If you are, you're
Oh,
muted.
sorry.
Nope.
So we have all these products that we've developed with communications and toolkits that provide that kind of information. And I think that's a good starting place. The other thing is that the action plan that's scheduled to be updated is the only action plan in the United States that's been codified and is up for revision. And then OAH also has this significant linkage up and down the entire West Coast with Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California through the PAC that is, I think, unique to them and provides a West Coast, a full West Coast perspective, and a place where a lot of things can happen along ocean acidification and hypoxia, not just centered in Oregon, but does include Oregon. And so with that kind of coalition comes additional benefit and additional, I think, ways to look at the value and the need to make sure that we have someone in there that is able to help us manage and administer this council. I'll use the example back in last December at a state lands meeting, the Elliott Forest came up, and I think it was the Department of Forestry says, you know, we love the Elliott Forest, we love doing what we've been doing, but we can't do it anymore. And the governor and all the folks at State Land Board were there, and you know, the state lands took on the management of the forest, but reluctantly, and it wasn't in their budget, it wasn't in their plans, and you know, that's just kind of it's a good example of a significant public resource, highly valued, that was at threat. And I think we have the same situation here with our ocean and our ocean conditions that this coordinating council does do a significant amount of work on.
And that's,
especially with this coalition. So,
yeah, Keith, the staff list is huge. I mean, I've been on the council since, you know, for the last 2 years, and I can tell you that the work gets done by the staff. And so not having that staff line will completely obliterate our ability to move forward on the action.
So it's positions, they're cutting positions?
Yeah, it's the position to
Do you know what the budget is roughly?
I'd have to see, Keith, you put the links in, I'd have to go.
yeah, all the links are there, and so all that information's in those links.
Yeah, I just don't have it open right now. Yeah, so it's like staff one or percentage of the staff.
And is that staff have to be hired through the state, or are there other entities that could?
Well, right, you could, I mean, that is potentially an alternate strategy.
I was thinking, like, this is just like the Marine Reserves assessment. Yeah. Here's something that the state had a responsibility for. Their funding didn't come through. We went out, we raised $100,000 across, you know, 4 or 5 different funders to just get the job done. I'm not necessarily suggesting that that's exactly what we do, but it could be that we have, you know, that we have a project around this, and we can give funds directly to agencies to support work. It doesn't have to go through competitive grants programs, and it does keep capacity going. If there were entities that said, this is important and it should continue until the budget can recover to a point where the state can get this back on track. I don't know, just throwing it out there.
It's a pretty specific.
And it may not get cut. It's like all these budgets. You know, there's always things that are going to fall below the line, but I don't think we should just hope. Hope's not a strategy. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Wasn't
for a funder that wants to put funds towards carbon, climate, and, you know, those kinds of bigger issues, this is that. So. All right. I think we're just a few minutes before time. We're good to go?
Thank you,
All right.
Keith, and thank you,
Thank you.
Ellie, for joining us.
Yes, thank you all for joining and
Thank you.
enjoy your day wherever you are.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks for letting me hang out with you.
Doors open.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think.